It's a gorgeous, stormy, snowy day outside, and I'm going to cozy in and talk about all the books that I read in autumn to kind of reflect a little bit on the autumn months and what I read. I read some absolute bangers in autumn, some books that have been on my TBR for a very long time, and they just completely swept me away, and I'm so excited to talk about them. And then there were also a couple books that I could have skipped. I'll let you know about those too. A lot of the books on this list are going to be quite spooky because that's generally how I like to keep my reads in the autumn months. But I do have a couple random ones that are not entirely autumnal. So let's start with a spooky one. This is a book that I found out about when I was watching one of Emmy's older vlogs, and she talked about it with such warmth and such excitement that it really got me excited about it too, and I picked it up. And I'm talking about The Dark Descent of Elizabeth Frankenstein by Kiersten White. I read this one during a 24-hour readathon, and honestly, it was the best reading experience that I've had this whole entire season. It was the most beautiful autumnal day. The foliage was in full peak, colors everywhere, and I just read this the entire day. It was the perfect companion to that perfect fall day, honestly. This is a retelling of the story of Frankenstein, and it's told from the perspective of Elizabeth, who is Victor's fiancée. So in the original story by Mary Shelley, we get mostly the perspective of Victor the scientist, but we don't get as much the perspective of his fiancée. We get her perspective through a couple of letters, but not really enough for us to fully understand her situation or her point of view. And so essentially, this is retelling the whole entire story of Frankenstein. And even beyond that, it goes as far back as when Victor and Elizabeth were kids. So Elizabeth has been taken on by Victor's family, and so she kind of was brought up in their home and became very, very close with Victor because of that. They lived together, they had their childhood together. I feel like in the booktube community, we keep talking about the same spooky books, and it's amazing because, like, good books are being read by a lot of people nowadays, but not a lot of people talk about this one. And let me tell you, this is peak fall vibes. If you love Frankenstein, or even if you've never read Frankenstein, this is still a great book on its own. I love how Kiersten White did almost an impossible job in my mind of paying homage to what Mary Shelley did in her story, but also making the story her own without, disrespecting anything that came before, without really stepping on anyone's toes, metaphorically speaking. In the first book, I really loved how a lot of the themes that were brought up in Frankenstein were really developed deeply into this book as well. For example, the theme of nature and creation was really well woven into this story. And so it felt that although I was reading a new book, it was a new book and it's a new concept, but it's also something that really brought me back to the original story, which I loved because I am a huge fan of Frankenstein. So because we're retelling the story that is predominantly about a male character, obviously this has some feminist undertones, the difficulties of Elizabeth trying to find a place for herself in society. So she's an orphan, she doesn't have parents. She also is not married yet to anybody, and so she kind of lives in this difficult limbo situation where she doesn't really have a father to take care of her financially, but then she also doesn't have a husband. So you can see how that really, really upsets her, and she almost becomes obsessed with finding a good situation for herself economically and socially, and that becomes her motivation in almost everything that she's going to do throughout her life. And I really enjoyed how the author went about describing that situation and creating that story, because it was much more complex than I had anticipated. It's not as easy as, oh, poor Elizabeth, she has to deal with this, but also a lot of the choices that she's going to make throughout her life are unreasonable, and they are really stretched to the extreme because she becomes so obsessed with this stability that she's trying to get to herself. And you get to question whether it's okay for her to act in this way, or to accept certain things, or to enable certain people to do really, really gruesome and horrible acts. I really enjoyed this. I thought it was very cleverly written, very atmospheric, fall vibes, obviously. If you are a fan of Frankenstein and would like to go back to that wonderful atmospheric world that Mary Shelley created, I think this is a wonderful way to do that without, having to reread Frankenstein itself. I highly, highly recommend this book. It was really, really, really good. I also read a shorter work that was on my list for a very long time. It's an American classic, and I'm talking about The Legend of Sleepy Hollow by Washington Irving. I also watched a movie. Ooh, and I forgot to say, but I also watched the new Frankenstein that came out this year. Lovely. A cinematic masterpiece. I loved it so much. Anyways, I also watched a movie of The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, and I read the book as well. The movie was the one that was with Johnny Depp. I really enjoyed the movie. The book, not as much. The book was strictly okay. Didn't bring much value to my life. I did love a couple of sections of the book where there were the beautiful descriptions of the food during Halloween. I thought that was marvelously described. When I did my readathon, I actually read this during the readathon, and I read a passage that was probably my favorite passage from the whole entire story, where Washington Irving described the food. So if you want to see a little snippet of that, go watch the video. But other than that, I just felt that the story was just there. It's basically the story of Ichabod, who is a school teacher in the local community of a very small town village, and he becomes obsessed and enamored with Katrina Van Tassel, who is this beautiful lady living also in this village. And it's essentially him just thinking about her and trying to get her. And obviously set in the mysterious Sleepy Hollow, this small village where there's a lot of folklore and a lot of superstitions about a headless horseman who is going around and killing people. Everything about that description sounds great to my ears, but then when I came to actually read it, the execution of it was just a bit bland and boring for me. Next, I'm going to talk about a book that has been highly, highly praised on BookTube for a long time. And this is the second time this year when I get really disappointed by a book talk, BookTube type of book that really just lets me down. The first one was something with fairies, Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies. I also read that book a little bit earlier this year and I found it so boring. And then I tried another one that was very similar in that vein of cozy fantasy. I think I'm just going to give up on cozy fantasy. It's just not for me. I'm just not a cozy fantasy girly. The book that I'm referring to is The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches by Sangu Mandanna. So, okay, let me give you a bit of synopsis before I try to wrap my head around how to describe how I felt about this book. So this book follows Mika, who is a witch, and Mika is a little bit of a loner, as is the tradition with witches. So witches are expected to not really stick together because the collective forces of witches sticking together could create dangerous situations. So they're not supposed to kind of live with each other. And so a lot of witches in this world are very kind of just solitary. And so Mika being alone, she finds solace in creating and making videos and uploading them online about what it means to be a witch. But this is all with the kind of general social understanding that her videos are a bit of a satire and that witches don't really exist. However, she gets a really weird email from a viewer who states that he actually believes that she's a real witch, and he invites her to come to a very mysterious estate to take care and to educate a couple of witches. So Mika not having a lot going on for her, she decides to take that on. So essentially she gets there and, there's all these kind of cutesy challenges with one of the young witches not being really likable, and she doesn't really like Mika in general. And then there's also this grumpy librarian who is maybe falling for Mika and Mika is maybe falling for him. It's a type of book that is cute, and that's really what it is. The writing is not cringy, but it's also not special. The themes explored are done in a way that is very matter of fact, simplistic. Everything felt just, again, flat, bland, just like it's there I get it. I see it. I think the lack of a more substantial plot is I'm finding out about myself as a reader is really, really important to me. It's just not enough to keep me interested. If the themes are not well developed and there's not a little bit more complexity there, I get bored really, really fast. So unfortunately, this was a miss for me. It's not a bad book, but it's not a book that I am super excited to think about or to have read. I am going to talk about a book that I've read this month in November. This was a very sad book. This was a book that was on my 2025 TBR, so I'm very excited that I got to it before the year concludes. And that is Kazuo Ishiguro, Never Let Me Go. I knew going into the story that the story was going to be a little bit weird and maybe a little bit different from what I expect from the typical literary fiction, and it definitely was. And I'm very happy that I went into it with the right type of expectations. I know that a lot of people have been caught off guard reading this book, thinking that it was going to be something, and then it went a completely different direction. This book, I will have to say, it's not an easy book. It's a book that challenges you and makes you struggle to get to some of the things that are hidden in there. It's like little hidden prizes that you get to uncover every single page. And also, I think this is the type of book that you could reread every year, and every single time you reread it, you will find new nuggets that you haven't discovered before that just enhance the themes that are explored here. I don't know too much what to say because I don't want to spoil anything. But what I'll say is the story of a woman who is recounting her past and her memories. This book is very much a book about memory, and the way in which it's told, it also reflects that. It's told in a way that is not linear at all. It kind of goes back and forth through memories in the past. And this woman is possibly late 20s, early 30s, and she's just kind of reminiscing and thinking about and reflecting heavily on her childhood and her teenage years and how those have culminated into her becoming the woman that she is today. There are a lot of things that are explored in here that are very touching. Friendship is a theme that is extremely well developed in this book. We are following Kathy and her relationship with Tommy as well as Ruth. So those are her two best friends, and she is recounting her years in this secluded, weird, mysterious boarding school in England where they all met, and then continues the journey on throughout her life. It's also a story that questions social conditioning, what it means to be brought into something and to accept what the educational system that you're in teaches you. And it's even brought as far as social conditioning in terms of just your social environment, the people that you surround yourself with, what they do, the media that they consume, the way in which they behave with one another. It's kind of this very beautiful depiction of a push and pull type of relationship that we each one of us has with the world and with every single person that we interact. Sometimes we're able to pull a little bit more from a person and accept a lot of their values or accept their flaws, to be okay with the way that they act, even if we disagree with it. And in other times, in other moments, we just want to push our values and our understanding of the world on other people. I thought that was so brilliantly done in this book. It's really a quiet type of tragedy. It's a very sad book. It's a book that questions morality, ethics, it questions history. It's really, really a haunting book. Like it's the type of book that you read and you really have to sit and contemplate for a long time. In fact, I still feel like my feelings about it are still very mushed. Like I'm not able to clearly articulate how I feel about the book or what the book instilled in me. I feel like there's just so much more that I probably skimmed through and I haven't been able to internalize and fully understand myself. Needless to say, it was a book that deeply moved me. I cried at the end. Highly recommend it. Next, let me talk about an audiobook that I read, and it's actually the first book that I read in fall, and I really enjoyed it. It was The Bewitching by Silvia Moreno-Garcia. This is the second book that I pick up from her. I read Mexican Gothic a couple years ago, and I have to say I didn't really love that one, but The Bewitching, I really liked it. It was not anything out of the ordinary. It wasn't, the type of book that I'm going to be thinking about forever and it's rocking my world, but it was a book that surprisingly I really enjoyed, and it just gave me all the fall vibes that I needed it to. The story is told from the perspective of three women. So the first timeline is, I guess, what we would call the present day timeline, and it follows a young graduate student. She is doing her PhD, and her focus is on on a literary work that is really, really intriguing to her about the mysterious disappearance of a young girl. And so she goes on a quest to try to find out information about the story because it's a story that is very difficult to access and information about it is very scarce. The second timeline that we follow is the timeline of her grandmother and is a timeline that is really steeped in Mexican stories about witches. So those cultural elements I thought really, really made the story so much more interesting. I really enjoyed that specific section of the story where we were following the grandmother. And in this particular section, the grandma is, she's a young woman and she is going on a quest to try to figure out what happened to her brother who disappeared very mysteriously as well. And she is doing this with a lot of challenges along the way. Her mom, as well as her uncle, are seemingly just very disinterested by this disappearance. And so she's kind of like going against the wind and trying to figure out everything by herself. And obviously, there are a lot of magical elements that she gets to discover along the way. And then the third and final timeline is the timeline of the writer whom the graduate student is interested in finding more about. So we actually get to know the backdrop of how it came for her to write the story. I just really loved it. It was great for the fall season. It had, as I said before, those cultural elements of witches, which I thought were really, really well imbued into the story. I really enjoyed the more dark academia aspects of the story. So, because of the graduate student, oftentimes we're set in the university, and she's actually, I think, managing or directing the dormitories of the students. So it's interesting also to have that kind of more communal aspect of the university being brought into the story. It was really, really solid work and nothing too crazy, but just good vibes for the fall. Okay, we've been talking a lot about spooky stuff, so let me just give us a little bit of a break with a non-spooky read. So at the beginning of this year, I finished the Era 1 of Mistborn, and then I decided I'm going to take a little bit of a break between Era 1 and Era 2 because I heard that Era 2 is very different, and if you read it right after, you might be disappointed because, the world is just a little bit different. We are set 300 years into the future after Era 1, but officially, 11 months or so have passed and I felt completely ready to pick up Era 2, and so I did. I picked up The Alloy of Law, which is the first book in the Era 2, and let me just say that I'm so happy the books in Era 2 are so much shorter. This is like a typical length novel, but just because it's Brandon Sanderson, it reads so fast. It's like I devoured this in like 2 days. I have to say I was a little bit on the fence about Era 2 just because I knew that it was bringing in a lot of kind of Western aesthetics to it or atmosphere, and that's not really my vibe at all. But I surprisingly really enjoyed it. I thought it was a solid read. I didn't like it as much as Era 1. I feel like Era 1 are just epic, huge stories, and this one is more of a kind of palate cleanser type of book, if I can call it that. It's just kind of still very much Brandon Sanderson, but just tone it down a little bit. So essentially, we're following the story of Wax and Wayne, who is this most gorgeous duo I've ever encountered in a story. They have such good chemistry together, and Brandon Sanderson is able to really capture those comedic male friendship elements so well. Like, it's the type of friends that if you don't know they're friends, if you hear them talk to each other, you're like, these people hate each other, but in fact that's just their way to vibe with one another, and it's super fun to witness. And we are following them taking on the role of a little bit of investigators in Allendale, which is, the main big city. They are essentially investigating a lot of robberies that have been happening for a couple of months now, and people in the city are getting really frustrated. Obviously, a lot of merchandise has been lost, and also a lot of kidnappings have happened that are seemingly linked to allomancers and allomancer families. So the story itself is kind of, very forward plot, nothing really that cool about it in my personal opinion and view, but I did really enjoy to see how this world evolved after 300 years. There's so many technological evolutions that kind of just blow my mind. We are starting to see electricity come in, we are starting to see a lot of guns, really cool stuff, and also the magic system has evolved. So it's not that the magic system that we saw in the first era has remained the same, and in fact there seem to be more and more powers that are developed, and it hasn't really been revealed in this book, but I mean, Brandon Sanderson never lets me down, so I'm so sure in the following books we're going to see how these additional powers and these additional aspects of magic have developed over the course of 300 years. And I'm sure we're going to get all our answers about how it is that now we have so many more metals and we have so many more magical abilities that weren't really there in the first era. So I'm really excited to continue with this. It's really just a fun world to be in, as opposed to era one that felt way more serious and more somber, which I loved. I loved era one, but this one is just kind of a more fun vibe to it. So I'm just really, really excited to see where the rest of the books are going to go. The next book that I'm going to talk about is probably my favorite book of this whole entire season. It's a book that I really wanted to get to for a while, and I'm so excited that I did. It's a bit chunky, which is why I've been avoiding it. But honestly, it was the perfect fall book. I'm talking about Dracul by Dacre, Stoker, and J.D. Barker. So this is playing a lot on a retelling of Dracula. Essentially, what they claim to do is to tell the story of Bram Stoker as a child and then growing into an adult, and kind of the events that happened in his life that led him to believe that vampires were a real thing, and then what led him to actually write Dracula. Do I actually believe these things happened? Probably not, but it was just such a solid vampire story. I loved it so incredibly much. At the beginning of the story, we're following mostly Bram and Matilda, who is his sister, and both of them become really, really obsessed with their caretaker, Nana Allen, who seems to have some really spooky stuff happening around her. Bram is a very, very sickly child. He is dealing with a lot of difficulties of even just standing up and doing regular activities that a child would do. And the doctors in that period are not able to identify exactly what the illness is, or, what he's dealing with. And Nana Ellen mysteriously is able to heal him in some way or another. And she does this in a way that is, again, very mysterious. No one really knows what she's doing to him because he is so delirious because of his illness. He's also not really able to pinpoint exactly what has been done to him, but clearly something is fishy. And so we are following Bram and his sister try to figure out who this woman is, why she's able to heal him. I think that's as much of a synopsis I am going to give you so that you can find the rest out by yourself. But obviously, this book spans so much more than that. We go from their childhood all the way into their adulthood. There are other elements coming in that are really kind of reminding me a lot of Dracula itself, which I thought was really, really cool. Like, we have Bram's brother who becomes a doctor, and we get to go to psychiatrical hospitals, which is really a recurrent theme also in Dracula. We have Bram and his sister going on a little bit of a chasing during the night, and they end up in this abandoned woodsy estate. There are just so many beautiful gothic elements in this book. Like, everything gothic you can think about, it's all in here. The atmosphere is absolutely immaculate. The book is a bit long, but I just felt like I didn't mind how long it was because every single page just transported me into a different realm, into a different dimension that felt so spooky and gothic and absolutely everything that I wanted for October. If I'm not mistaken, I think Dacre Stoker came out with a couple other novels surrounding the Dracula story in general. So I think I really want to read some more of his works in the future because this was really, really solid. It was my favorite read of this whole entire season. So I'm really, really excited to read more from him. Okay, I have the last book to talk about, which is a book that I picked up on Halloween night. It was the best way to spend my Halloween evening, to be honest. And I'm talking about The Halloween Tree by Ray Bradbury. I've never read any of Ray Bradbury's books before, and now that I have read this one, I'm so excited to read more from him. I typically don't enjoy children's books at all. I oftentimes get quite bored with just how simple they are, But this one, although it's a children's book, it was so magical and so mystical and just honestly the best way to spend Halloween. So this follows a group of young boys who are getting ready on Halloween night to go trick or treating, but one of their best friends, Pip, is unable to join them. He's sick. Following that, Pip mysteriously disappears, and they all embark on a journey to try to find out what happened to him, led by this very mysterious creature, man. I don't even know. And in this journey, they basically go through so many different locations to uncover the secrets of Halloween and the history of Halloween in general. It just becomes this very global experience. I feel like Halloween is obviously a very westernized and specifically American, North American holiday. Not a lot of other cultures around the world really have Halloween in this way that we speak about Halloween, but what I loved about the story is that it really just showed that Halloween as a concept is actually a very global experience and it's derived from so many different cultures. We went through so many different death rituals across the globe. We went to ancient Egypt. We went to Dia de los Muertos in Mexico. We went to the Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, where the gargoyles that are really like a gothic symbol, where they came from. Overall, it was honestly such a good read, and I think there's actually a animated movie that was made out of this book, so I'm excited to maybe pick it up next Halloween. I just loved it. Like I'm just smiling the whole time that I'm thinking about it. It was just such a charming little book. I don't think it was a full 5 stars for me. I feel like 5 stars for me, it just requires the book to have a bit more depth and get me to think about it a bit more. So maybe that's why it's not like the perfect full 5 stars, but it's just the most wonderful little story. It's a very short story too, so you can just literally read it in one night, which is what I did, and it just enhanced my Halloween experience so much more. I think we did it. I think we talked about all the books that I read this fall. If you've made it this far in the video, I hope that you got some recommendations from this list because honestly, I read some really, really good books this fall. And I'm also very excited to move into my winter reads. So stay tuned for a lot of content on winter reading because I'm so, so excited about it. Thank you so much for joining me in this video. I hope you're having a great day and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.